It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Ruth Rogoff. Your maiden name was Biron, and Ruth, you have one of the most incredible, amazing stories, being a survivor, being born in Germany, and how you came to England. It's just remarkable. So Ruth, if you could tell us a little bit about your family and your roots and how you survived.
I think I'll read what I want to say because it would make it quicker and I won't dilly-dally about different things. I called it A Life for a Menu. My story should begin with my birth, but like all good Jewish stories, it has to begin with my parents. My father, Jakob Biron, was born in Dukla, a village on the outskirts of Krakow in Poland. He was the eldest of 6 siblings in a humble, deeply religious Hasidic family. When he was 4, the family moved to Zwickau, a town near Leipzig in northeast Germany, not far from Berlin. The reason for the move was the need for a livelihood. My late grandfather had managed, through the help of a friend, to gain the position of Rebbe and general factotum to a modest Jewish community. To supplement his income, he collected schmutters, which were sold as shoddy for stuffing in mattresses. Although the family were obviously very orthodox, they were also great Zionists and always wanted and hoped to be able to get to what was then Eretz Israel. My father, being the eldest, was also responsible for arranging all family affairs. The youngest boys were sent to Bnei Akiva Hachshara near Berlin. The girls hoped to leave with their parents or eventually a shidduch that would grant them the freedom to leave Germany. My father was also a prominent member of Maccabi, which was then not just a sports association but also a big social club attracting membership from all over Europe. My mother was born in Siret in the Bukovina, Romania. She had 2 older brothers and 1 younger. Again, it was a fervently Zionist family. The older boys very active in the Polizion movement, which was very strong in Romania at that time. She hated the primitive and depressing conditions in Siret, which don't seem to have altered a great deal when I visited recently. And as soon as she was 18, she left. She went to live with her brother Dov, who had married and moved to Leipzig in Germany. It was there, in Maccabi, that she met and married my father in December 1931. By then, conditions for Jews in Germany were already very precarious. So many wanted to leave, but getting an exit visa meant leaving everything behind apart from a small amount of personal property and practically no money on exit. This also entailed getting an entry visa to a country willing to take you. Anyone without wealth, distinction, special expertise or sponsors had little chance. Immigration to Palestine was strictly measured and enforced by Britain, who were anxious to appease their Arab friends. This drastically cut the numbers of ordinary families wanting to emigrate but never able to fulfill the necessary regulations. My family, both paternal and maternal, had only one country in mind, Palestine. My mother's 2 older brothers managed to get there. One of my father's younger brothers went with a Hachshara group in 1939, and that was it. In desperation, people started crossing the German border with Czechoslovakia illegally. This way, they didn't wait for visas and took as much with them as they could. It was dangerous, but for many worth the risk. They had to climb the mountain range, the Erzgebirge that divides the 2 countries, and slip through that way. For that, they needed a mountain guide, and this is where my father comes into the story. Maccabi had a sports hut on the mountain range to provide shelter for their members when climbing or skiing. Groups of refugees met at this hut, and my father guided them over the border. He was one of the special couriers helping at that time. He was, however, betrayed and imprisoned. On his release in early 1938, he knew he had to flee, and we made the same journey over the mountains and found ourselves in Prague, desperate for a visa to anywhere. I was born in June 1933, 6 months after Hitler came into power. I lived with my parents in Zwickau, surrounded by a large extended family. My younger brother was born in November 1936, as life became increasingly difficult. We both have a swastika on our birth certificate, a menacing reminder of the times. Living in Prague was not easy. My father desperately searched for ways to get to Palestine. Financially, money was running out, and with illegal status, work was impossible. Every day, the thousands besieging every embassy increased, begging, praying, hoping for salvation in the form of a visa to anywhere. Then the impossible happened. Hitler invaded Czechoslovakia without a voice raised in disapproval. March 1938, the streets of Prague echoed to the sound of jackboots. It was obvious that my father had to disappear before they came for him. He decided to flee to Poland, to his unfortunate family who had been deported from Zwickau with the Kristallnacht deportations and dumped on the Polish border. As Ostjuden, they were polluting Germany, and as refugees, the Polish population certainly didn't want them. There were thousands of them, and apart from the rampant anti-Semitism, there was no provision of food or shelter for so many. Added to this was the fear of the Nazi threat on the Polish border. So my father disappeared, and my mother was left alone in Prague, with little money and 2 small children. She joined the endless queues every day at every embassy. The result was always the same. If she ever reached an official, they would ask the obvious questions. Did she have any special skills? No. Did she have a sponsor to vouch for her maintenance? No. What would she do with 2 small children in a country whose language she didn't speak? The deportations began. Swiftly and efficiently, streets were cleared of their Jewish inhabitants, and panic increased. Then suddenly my mother grasped at the last straw. The British Embassy decided to award 2 visas to the winners of a cookery competition. It gave anyone and everyone a chance. What could my mother lose? She cooked a traditional Friday night Shabbat meal and hoped for salvation. She won. It was now the end of August 1939. Late at night, there was a knock on our door. As a rule, it meant just one thing: deportation. There was an 8 p.m., 8 a.m. curfew, and no one was allowed out without risking death. This, however, was a woman's voice, and my mother let her in. She turned out to be a secretary from the British consulate on a mission to save our lives. She gave my mother her British entry visa, train tickets to get through Czechoslovakia, then Holland, and the ferry to England, but had not been able to get us exit visas giving us permission to leave Prague. We just had to take a chance and say we were visiting family if questioned. We could take no luggage that could look suspicious, only food and a few necessities. At the crack of dawn, on a boiling hot day, my mother dressed me in the suffocatingly warm clothes, including ankle boots and long socks. She was always very elegant, tall, blonde, blue-eyed, and wore her best clothes. Looking round for something of value to take with her that she could sell, she opted for a silver fox fur stole, a great fashion accessory at that time. Draping it round her neck, the mouth of the unfortunate fox clipped to the tail. She hoped nobody would comment despite the obvious heat. My brother, aged nearly 3 at that time, was put in his pushchair, and we left without a word to anyone. The journey across Czechoslovakia was without incident. Getting off at the German border was more frightening. We boarded the German train and found an empty carriage. Then suddenly an SS officer decided to join us. I can't imagine how my mother felt, but apparently he had an idea of what we were doing. He hinted that he could help her, but despite that her blonde looks, and as well as my brother's Aryan face, were okay, I was the thorn, a dark, skinny, obviously Jewish child. However, thanks to the fact that he stayed with us and did not betray us, helped us. We disembarked at the Dutch border and crossed into Holland, and what I thought was heaven, and I remember it. The Dutch Jewish Refugee Committee met us and gave us food and sweets. They tried to persuade my mother to stay in Holland where they would help her. After all, she had no idea where her husband was, if alive. She had no one in England, didn't speak English, and Hitler will never come to Holland, they said. She was nevertheless adamant. An unknown woman had risked her life coming through the curfew to bring her the visa, and she was not going to let her down. We then went on through Holland to the port of Hook of Holland and boarded a ferry for Ramsgate. There we boarded a train for Liverpool Street Station, London. I was wild with excitement. After nagging my mother continuously to, "When will we be in England?" she said, "When it starts raining, you'll know we have arrived." It did rain. Then the sun came out as we steamed into the station. It was Sunday, September the 3rd, 1939. As my foot touched the platform, it was 11 a.m. and there was a huge announcement on a loudspeaker. I, of course, didn't understand what it meant. My mother didn't either. The speaker was Chamberlain telling the British people that Hitler had invaded Poland on September the 1st and Britain had given him an ultimatum. If he did not withdraw his troops by 11 a.m. on September the 3rd, Britain would declare war. This was the case, and as a result, Britain was now at war and the gates to freedom were closed. This was followed by an air raid siren being sounded, and the Jewish Refugee Committee, waiting for people like us, took us first to an air raid shelter and then to a hostel for women and children in Stamford Hill. There were a number of these hostels with separate facilities for men. The following day, my mother took a paper with my father's details and his photo, hoping to leave it in one of the men's hostels for the faint possibility that someone might have come across him somewhere. Knocking on the door of the first hostel, a man opened it. It was my father. My father's story. He managed to get to Poland, where he found his family in their original village, living in terrible circumstances, with little food and less money. He himself was a fugitive and had no means of helping them. He decided that the only way was for him to get to a free country and find a way of bringing them over. At the same time, he had to try and find out what was going on in Prague. He heard, however, that there was a ship sailing from the Balkans for political refugees, not necessarily Jews. As he had been imprisoned for political activities against the Reich, he was able to get on board. There were about 1,000 men, including President Beneš of Czechoslovakia. When this ship reached the English Channel, it was too big to enter, so apparently the men were divided into 3 groups alphabetically. The first group would go to England, the second group to France. Hitler will never come to France. The third group stayed on the ship and would sail to Canada. My father, Jacob Biron, was with the first group and arrived in London. It was July 1939. He now had to find a way to communicate with his wife and children, bring them to safety. The days were a nightmare. Whatever he tried was in vain. One day he heard the newspaper vendors shouting, "England in danger! England in danger!" Unable to read the paper, he asked someone to tell him what had happened. Sick with grief, he couldn't believe the news. The disaster was that England were in danger of losing the Ashes to the West Indies. For the uninitiated, this is cricket. We cannot imagine what his thoughts were when he tried to understand the source of his anxiety. So now we were together again, saved in a miraculous way. How did we come to Leeds? Everyone asks. Everyone of German origin was interned by the British government at the start of the war. However, my father was stateless and as such had to live at least 30 miles away from the coast to ensure there was no kind of subversive communication. He put a pin into the centre of a map of England and it came to a town called Huddersfield in Yorkshire. His question then was concerning Jewish facilities such as a shul, kosher food, etc. Finding out there was no Jewish community in Huddersfield, he asked for the nearest town with these facilities, and that was Leeds. I still have a home in Leeds, always grateful to the country that saved us, and the city that gave me shelter, the country that gave me a brilliant education, and the opportunity to do whatever I wished regardless of race or religion. I am an observant Jew, proud of my heritage, a home in Netanya, and my heart in Israel, but always in debt to Britain and its people.
Ruth, it is just unbelievable. It's magnificent, really. What an amazing story. There are no words. There really are no words.
I was lucky. I was very lucky.
Ruth, can I ask you, what is your earliest recollections that you can still remember? Do you remember anything about Germany?
Well, I remember when my brother was born. I remember my father waking me up and saying we were going to collect my little brother. And I knew that the Mashiach had arrived. I knew the Mashiach had arrived. My brother was born. I remember living in Prague. I remember the entrance hall. I've been back to the same place. It's exactly the same where we lived in Prague, actually.
And you've been into the home?
I've been into the house. I tried to get... I've got friends I met whilst in our camping holidays. We met friends from Prague, and we went to stay with them. And they took me to Popiatowa number 7 in Prague. And I went into the building and I recognised the entrance hall because it has beautiful tiles, Delft tiles, and I remember them. But the woman in the flat that we were in wouldn't let us in. But there's something very interesting about this flat. We lived in Prague, my mother and I, and my brother. And there was a woman living underneath us. And when we were in England, during the war, my father, and I've got the original letter, you have the original letter there, wrote to this woman, I've forgotten her name, but it's on the original letter, dear Frau so-and-so, he wrote in German. We are now in England, and my wife left a trunk. You have these big wooden trunks with some of our possessions in the flat that we owned. If you send this trunk to my brother in Palestine, because my father still believed he was going to get to Palestine. If you send this trunk to my brother in Palestine, you can keep anything that's in the flat. You can have it. She could have had it anyway, wouldn't have mattered. But he also put a rider in to say, if that is too difficult to send it to Palestine, this is wartime Czechoslovakia we're talking about, please send it to us. Please forward it to us. Anyway, in the middle of the war, I don't know which year it was, in the middle of the war, a wooden trunk arrives in our place that we're living in. We lived in a poor part of Leeds at that time, very poor part of Leeds. And who was it from? My Uncle Moshe in Palestine. What she'd done, she sent it to Palestine. Moshe sent it to England. This is all in the middle of the war. And we received it, and I've got linen, because you couldn't take anything, pillowcases, tablecloths, photographs. I've got a photo album over there which was in that trunk, and it arrived in the middle of the war in England without anything having been destroyed or touched. It's unbelievable.
It's incredible.
That photo album over there, that blue one, that one over there, is my parents' original photo album, and this arrived with the original photo. Well, if I hold it up, it'll fall out. But it's got original. It's got some of the original photos in it, and this arrived in England, together with all sorts of linen and things that my children still have.
So these photos are so precious. It's a history of your family.
Well, some of them have been taken out and put into different contexts, because of the museums and things. What does it say there? Oh, this is my Auntie Faye, or Fanny as she was at that time, at their wedding in Fanny and Arthur, 1936.
And this is your family from your grandparents from Krakow in 38.
It's got a Krakow 1938. No, it says Zwickau, March 1938. And this is a family photo, yes. And we're not on it.
But you have your grandparents?
My grandparents, the one with the beard is my grandfather. The one next to him is my grandmother. And then my Uncle Moshe, who ended up in Israel, is over here. And there are members of the Fink family who were my grandmother's family. That was her maiden name. But it's written, the inscription is the original inscription. You see.
And this is the original photo?
Yes, original photo.
And then you have, these are just amazing, these pictures. This is really your history of your family.
I can't tell you what this is, when it was, or anything. I really don't know. It could be, this could be Germany. This could be, well, it should say so. Yes, it is Germany. It's got the photographer's name on it. No, it isn't. It says Photo Wald, but then it looks as if it's got a... I don't know. I don't know where this is, and I don't know who they are, but it is an original photo.
It's amazing. And this is a picture, a photograph before Kristallnacht in...
Oh yes, yes. This it says on my relative, someone wrote on it in April 1938 auf dem Sportplatz in... I don't know what this is. In Zwickau, it must be, yes.
Yeah, in
must be in
Zwickau.
Zwickau. These are my aunts.
These
These are my aunts and my uncle in Zwickau. Yeah.
This is just so precious. And look, there's a car in the background.
My father, I must tell you, my father had a factory in Zwickau. He had a very, very poor background, and he had a very poor upbringing as a child. But the schmatters that they collected, he actually had a very successful business, and he had a car. He had a car, a Ford, he told me. I mean, he loved cars, and he bought it, so he was a successful businessman. I was dressed in the most beautiful clothes. If you can see some of...
I'll just show you, as a baby, this is you in Zwickau as a baby.
I don't know. Yeah, well, you don't need both. This is me in Zwickau as a baby. It says here, somebody's written... I don't know what it says in here, but it's...
In 1934.
Yes, it says 1934. Unsere Puppe, our doll. Something... I can't see what it says in here. 1934. But there's still, yes, it's the original photo. Not very exciting. Not very.
It's exceptionally. This is the iconic picture with you and your brother.
Yes, well, that was when we arrived in Leeds. This is a photo taken in 1940, October 1940, by the Yorkshire Evening Post. I have the original newspaper cutting with the photo in it. I went to school across the road, and the brothers of my teacher were journalists with the Yorkshire Evening Post, and she sent them to interview me. And this is the original photograph with my original clothes that I was wearing.
And you have if you look closely, you have a Magen David. Yeah.
I've got that Magen David was sent to me, I don't know when, from Palestine by my Uncle Chaim. And I wore it all the time. And then many years later, I went swimming in the sea, I think it was in Israel, it must have been, and I lost it, which I grieved very much about it, but it's still...
You can see it, yeah, and you can see it with your brother with the scooter as well, in this picture.
See, scooters are not a modern invention. He had one then, he had one then. Somebody gave him it, obviously it was a present for us.
And Ruth, do you remember there was a little bit of anti-Semitism when you got to school in...
No, only in...
was this a bit later?
Yeah, there was no anti-Semitism in my primary school, because most of the children, I think there were 60 children in my class. It was during wartime, only girls. It was Cowper Street School, which a lot of people will remember if they went to Cowper Street School in Leeds. And they had to engage students from the colleges to teach, because all the men were called up to go to war. So we had 60 little girls in my class, and not only did we learn, but we were well behaved, believe it or not. We were really well behaved. And I managed to get a very good education.
And Ruth, can I ask, when you came to London,
To Leeds.
but before, when you arrived in London, and then when they had with the Blitz, when they had the bombing, and then...
Yeah, well, I don't remember. All I remember when we arrived in, living in this hostel, and then they had to get these people out of the hostels because they were filling, they didn't have the space. I remember my father going out, we were parents on the street with us, and he saw Rabbi Schonfeld's Jewish schools being herded together, and he didn't know what it was, obviously, but he went over to speak to one of the Rabbanim. He only spoke Yiddish, of course, so he said, where are these children going and what are you doing? And they said, well, we're evacuating them. And my father probably had no idea what that meant. But he said, will you take her? And he pointed to me. I was 6.5 then, nearly 7. And he said, we must have explained what had happened, who we were and so on. And they sent me off with a notice round my neck. My name is Ruth Biron. I do not speak English. Please help me, like Paddington Bear. And I was sent off to these people to be evacuated, and I had a very hard time. And they had a very hard time with me. Because although I'd been a very good child till that time, I remember I didn't give my mother any trouble. I was not naughty, I was not difficult, I was very intelligent and cooperative. But the minute I was I didn't know, maybe they explained to me what was happening, but I don't think they did. I can't remember, obviously. I thought they'd abandoned me. And I felt terrible, terrible. And from there, I don't remember how or why, but I ended up in a place in Windermere.
But I think before that, you were crying, and then they gave
I was crying. The story of me crying, I cried all the time. And they tried to comfort me with something. And
this was in Wales?
Yes, in Caerphilly in Wales. I've got the photos of the people, actually, with the letters later on that we wrote. They tried to. They didn't speak German. I didn't speak English. I was a little child, and I'd had a very difficult time till then, and it must have all come out then. So I remember distinctly sitting at the kitchen table one day, crying for a change, and my host mother, who tried her very, very best, thought she'd do something wonderful for me. So she went out and came back with a colouring book and colouring pencils. And I was absolutely thrilled. And I started colouring and I was happy. I didn't cry. I thought it was I remember the feeling of absolute joy of colouring. And opposite me on the wall was a calendar. And it was in English, obviously, but at the end of every row of dates, there was a red, it was marked in red. And I said to my host mother, what are these squares in red? And she said, Saturday and Sunday. And so she managed to convey to me I knew what Saturday and Sunday were. And I said, well, what is today? And she said, today is Saturday. And I went crazy, of course. I was a Hasidic child, brought up in a Hasidic home, didn't know anything about anything. And I started crying, screaming, the Mashiach won't come, and the Malach HaMovis is going to kill me. And this poor woman hadn't any idea what I was talking about, and I tried to convey to her, today is Shabbat, and Jewish children are not allowed to crayon on Shabbat. So this very clever lady, a very good woman to put up with me, went out of the door, And she came back a few minutes later, and she said, "I have spoken to the rabbi." I could gather what she was talking about. The Rebbe, the rabbi says, because it is wartime, Jewish children are allowed to colour. That made it absolutely all right. I believed her. She was happy, I was happy, and nothing, the Malach HaMovis didn't come to take me.
Such a kind lady, such a clever lady as well.
That's a clever woman, an ordinary working class woman. She did her very best. She was so good to me, and I was very difficult.
But it must be very difficult for you.
It was difficult for me, I couldn't help it.
And then you went to Windermere?
I can't remember a lot about it. All I know about Windermere was it was a hostel for girls on the Kindertransport. I don't know why I was there. I tried to remember, but I can't remember. And why I remember it, I'll tell you why I remember it. Because they took us. It was raining. It was in the Lake District. And it always rains there. It's a beautiful part of England, but it always rains. And it was raining one Sunday afternoon. I remember it was a Sunday afternoon, and I remember it was raining. They said they'd take us to the pictures, the cinema. I'd never been to a cinema. I didn't know what a cinema was. And they tried to explain it to me, but I couldn't understand what a cinema was. They took us to pictures, and I remember sitting there, and what was the film? Bambi. I was absolutely enchanted by this film. But when Bambi's mother, I can remember to this day, and I'm 91 now, when Bambi's mother got shot in the film somewhere, she gets shot. I was so grief-stricken that I wet myself. And I remember the shame and I was so upset by the film and the fact that what I'd done, I was a big girl, 7 years of age, That I remember, and I'm 91 now. It's amazing what you do remember, though, your childhood.
And do you remember when you were reunited with your parents and your brother?
Yes, I was. I mean, eventually I got back to they found a place in Leeds. My father found a place. I got back, yes. And the first thing they did, I remember the first thing they did was, Ruth has to go to Cheder. First thing I remember them saying, Ruth has to go to Cheder. I wasn't sure what Cheder was, but I got to Cheder. And the Cheder was a very nice, very modest man who couldn't make a living any other way. Was the Cheder teacher. I was the only pupil in this particular part of the Cheder. I don't know what happened to the rest of them. And he taught me to read Hebrew very quickly. And that was my first introduction to Cheder, and I loved it. I loved him, I loved learning. That was Cheder.
And Ruth, do you remember Rabbi Schoenfeld?
Yes, he headhunted me when I qualified from university. He headhunted me from London to come and teach at the Hasmonean Grammar School for Girls. And I started teaching there in September 1955. I got married August 1955, and I started teaching there in September 1955. He was not a good employer, I must tell you. I won't go into details, but he tried not to pay me at times, and of course I needed the money desperately. And
I think he was doing so. They say he saved a lot over 3,000.
He saved a lot of lives. He was an absolutely very tall, over 6 foot tall, handsome man, very arrogant, very sure of himself, and that's why he managed to do what he did. But he didn't think about anybody else.
But in Schoenfeld Square, they've got his quote where they say, how many Jews did he manage to save? He said, that's not the question. The question is, how many did we not manage to save?
Yeah. Well, that he couldn't help. He did incredible things, but he was. I can't go into the story of after we were married, but because we were married at that time, Dov and I were married. But we had nowhere to live, and he gave us a room in the school above in the attic of the school, so he could keep me as a teacher. Because I said, if I've got nowhere to live, I've got to go back to Leeds. He said, he moved the desks. He said, here's an oven, here's a bed. You're all right.
And Ruth, can I ask, when you were growing up in Leeds,
yes,
were there any other survivors in the Kindertransport, or did you have friends that were also from Germany or from Europe?
No, I didn't. There may have been, I don't know. There must have been. Yes, later on. I joined B'nai Akiva when I was very young. In fact, what happened was my mother had lodgers. We rented a house, an old Victorian house, and my mother had lodgers, and one of her lodgers I can't remember what date it was the Martin Steinberger. I remember his name. Don't remember people's names I met yesterday or today, but I remember Martin Steinberger came to start B'nai Akiva in Leeds, and I can't remember exactly when it was. And he had a room in my mother's house and took me with him when he started B'nai Akiva. And in B'nai Akiva I found other people from Europe, possibly. But we didn't talk about those things. We were English children by then, you know. I mean, Jewish children, obviously, but we never talked about anything.
And Ruth, it's quite rare that your family, being Hasidic, was also very Zionistic.
Very Zionist. Very the Bukovina ones, the ones from Romania, when my uncle Chaim and my uncle Dov managed to get to Palestine in the early 1930s, but my uncle Leon, who went through Theresienstadt and all the rest, and his family died, was in 1947. He survived with his wife and one child. He was brought to Palestine in 1947, and the Sochnut then, or whatever the Sochnut, most of the survivors or people who came at that time, I mean, Palestine was in a bad physical state. They were given sikul avanim, hard physical work. My uncle Leon got work in an office in Jerusalem because of his pre-war work with the Poale Zion movement. The Poale Zion gave him work in an office in Jerusalem. He was in a ma'abara, a tin hut outside Jerusalem somewhere for new immigrants. So he didn't have good living standards, but he got a job. He wasn't doing sikul avanim. That was because of his pre-war work.
And Ruth, after the war, I think your parents managed to bring over to Leeds part of the family.
Well, no one survived except Hannah. My Auntie Hannah survived. So you see, in there several concentration camps. Plazhov, she was with Schindler and Plazhov. She was in quite a lot of them. She was in Ravensbrück. It's not on there. And she ended up in Auschwitz and went on the death march and ended up in Germany, in Leipzig, in a camp, and was rescued from there. But she managed to survive. And after the war, in a displaced person camp, she managed to find the whereabouts of her husband, her new husband. She hadn't been married long. And he was extremely ill. He was in the American zone, luckily. And they put him together as best they could, and they came to England in 1947. They came in, and why do I remember it? May 1947, they came to live with us. They had my room, and I moved into the attic, which I was very happy to do. But I also remember it because my cousin, who is also in Israel, lives in Israel, my cousin Barbara, she was born 2 weeks before my Auntie Hannah actually arrived. And her mother, my Auntie Fanny, couldn't go to the station because the baby was only a fortnight old, and she was worried in case, my uncle had TB and so on. So I remember that distinctly.
And this is
That's Hannah, yes. And there's a wedding photo of her there as well.
So this wedding photo is so rare and so special.
That is the original wedding photo, which I've blown up. I have a big copy in my...
But this is the original photo? The
original photo, which she carried about. She said she carried it in her shoe all the way through. They were interned, don't forget, they were interned in 1938. October 1938, they were deported from Germany. She was rescued, she with the war, after the war, in May 1947. Not 1947, 1945, what I'm talking about. 1945. And all that time she managed, so through all this time, she managed to save that photo. She said she had it in her shoe.
It's incredible.
And it is incredible because that is the original photo. She's the bride, and you see her bridegroom next to her. And family, of course, that didn't survive. None of them survived.
And can I ask, when growing up, you were during the war years, when did you or the family get to know what really had happened in Europe, or what had happened to the rest of the family?
I was a little girl. My parents didn't talk about it. They must have talked about it, but not to me. I got to know the horror of it when the liberation came. When the liberation came in England, they put in every cinema, they put the liberation of Buchenwald, or was it Belsen?
Bergen-Belsen.
Bergen-Belsen. And they put it on in the cinema. But in every cinema before any film, they showed that. And I went with my friends from Bnei Akiva. I went to see not the film. I wasn't interested in the film. I was interested in the liberation. Everybody had to watch it, and it was an iconic film. And of course, I mean, you must have seen it.
Yeah.
That brought home to me what actually happened. And then, of course, Hannah managed to contact us somehow or other, and I've got her letters, original letters, telling us not everything that happened, but roundabout. I heard that she had a child, and when Poland was invaded and they came for the Jews they were in Duklau first before they were moved to Krakow. My family died in Belgium. They sent them off to Belgium, but the young ones, like Hannah and her husband, they sent to work, in work camp. They sent them to Plazhov actually. But before them, they put them all in the square. I've been there, been back, and there's a square, same square, and her mother, my grandmother, was holding Hannah's baby, who must have been about 18 months old at the time. And she had a feeling, I suppose, that something was going to happen, so she handed the baby back to Hannah. And one of the soldiers, you see, this was not something that he had to do. He took the baby by the legs and smashed his head against the wall. Well, I mean, it's a terrible thing to even recount, but this is not one isolated incident of absolute hideous, unbelievable cruelty that was not necessary. The baby would have died anyway. They sent them all off to Belgium. Hannah was sent to Plazhov with her husband as well, but Lena and the others, they were sent to Belgium. And I just looked up today actually, the Belgium still had the old-fashioned gas that they used to gas people with, because they didn't perfect this gas until Auschwitz was built. So it was finished, and they managed to get Cyclone B or whatever it was, and it was quicker. But in Belgium it was all things that they tried out. So they had a horrible death. And also Belgium has got very little left in it. They razed it to the ground. There's very little left there apparently. I haven't been to Belgium. I've been to Auschwitz, and I've been to several camps,
And did she ever speak to you? Did she relate her experiences?
No, don't forget I was young. And maybe she didn't want to tell me. Maybe I didn't ask enough. I don't know. She must have spoken to my parents, obviously. I know her husband was very ill, and he eventually died. I got married in 55. He died in January 55, because I was hoping he'd be able to make it to my wedding. I remember that. But he died. I mean, he was very ill when he came, and couldn't last out. No, she didn't tell me. I've got a letter in that collection, original letter, when she first writes to my parents about what happened, but she doesn't go into detail. But in the original letters I've got, which I've got from way back 1913, 38, 39, 40, from 41 up to 41, where Lena writes from an amazing letter from Krakow, from the ghetto. And the letter was written on Purim. And she writes the most wonderful letter saying, we had a wonderful Purim. Everybody, we read the Megillah and everybody was happy, and we danced and we sang, and we're hoping for better times. And this is from the ghetto in Krakow in, must be 1940-41. And there are Red Cross cards, postcards in there, which you were allowed to send Red Cross postcards from Europe at that time with only so many words on it. And then after 1941 you said sender unknown, you know, unknown. Have you got them there?
Yeah, we have a few of these Red Cross these are all the originals.
Yes, the originals. I don't know how my father came to have one sent to Scotland. He said, Liebe Eltern und Schwester, es geht uns gut. Oh, he wrote to them. Dora den... yes, my father confirms. The 3rd of September, with the children in London, arrived in London on the 3rd of September. So he actually confirms that I arrived here on the 3rd of September.
Can we see that? That's incredible.
And the reply is on the back. The reply from the family in Krakow is in Gott sei Dank alle gesund. Oh no, this is him. That's the original that he writes at the back, and it's got the Red Cross stamp on it. But this isn't my father's writing. Oh, they're pleased that we arrived. I knew it was. This is the original. Unser Leben. Hannah and Zulik. I don't know where this comes from. Oh, 1947 when Hannah came to England.
And how is Hannah?
This is what is this one? Oh, this they sent to my Auntie Faye, who was also she came. She was in England as well. They sent this to her. They say you're allowed to send Red Cross, but only with so many words on it, and they could write something back. But what they wrote back was censored, obviously.
And Ruth, can I ask you, how was her? Was she very depressed or?
No. Well, look.
Having gone through having lost a child,
She wasn't depressed. When I say depressed, I didn't know I was young. Don't forget, I was young then. Sure. I was young. I was still a child then. I know she went to work. She wanted to work. She went into a clothing factory, and the owner of this big clothing factory, Leeds was a huge important centre for ready-made clothing. I don't know if you know. Yorkshire was a wool centre. Burton's and all the greats in wool at that time were all in Leeds. The giants of the textile industry in England were all in Leeds. And she went to the factory of one of these men. And he, you get your wages at that time at the end of the week. They used to put money in an envelope. I mean, that's how it was. And I remember my father telling my mother not to say anything to Hannah, but his friend John Ellis, who was who owned the firm, Ellis's, put double the amount of money in her envelope. She didn't know it. They didn't write the amount on. She just thought that was the amount that she got. And that's how he did it. So she got, people tried to help. No, we didn't know things about depression. We didn't know about depression in those days. We knew people were sad, and people must have obviously been depressed at times, but the word depression, I never heard it.
And did she have a family?
No. She became ill, and unfortunately, when things were going well for her and her reparations were coming through, this was some years later, and my father found a very nice little house for her, not far from where we lived at Moortown, a nice little house, and everything was going well. She got cancer of the throat, and he went. What was very remarkable, he went privately. Although he wasn't a wealthy man, he never had any money. He went privately to the best he could of that particular, cancer. And the surgeon's name was John Mills, believe it or not. And he said, hearing Hannah's history, he was going to perform the operation free of charge. And he did. And the operation was a success, but unfortunately, tragically, she died of secondary shock, which is very sad when everything was coming through for her.
Having survived.
And then she came to Israel, after 1948, she came to Israel, she met our relatives, her life was beginning to be good, and she had a house, and reparations were coming through, and she was going to have enough money apart from anything else. Makes a big difference to make your life better. That's how. I've named one of my granddaughters are named after Hannah. And, I've named all my children, my grandchildren, my grandchildren after my family.
And Ruth, you have this most amazing original letter from Berlin from 1938.
This is dated the 12th of. That's in, just don't put this one away, because that's Max. That's Max.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
This, my youngest uncle, who was 13 at the time in 1938. He was about. What he did is they sent as many children as they could. They sent on Hachshara. Now you couldn't go on Hachshara at 13 if you were too young. So they made out they were older. And he went on Hachshara, and then he was sent to 39. It was in Berlin, 39. He was on Hachshara, that's right. But it was already very bad for them at the Hachshara Center, And he wrote a letter to my uncle Moshe in Israel, who was in Palestine already, made Aliyah. He managed to get his Hachshara in 1939. And he wrote this letter, and they cut a section out of it.
I think the censors.
The censors cut a section out of it because he obviously said what he shouldn't be saying. And he also said to Moshe, being a little kid, "I'm really hungry. Can you send me some food?" It's in this letter. "I'm really hungry. Can you send me some food?" And of course, poor Moshe. Moshe was in Tirat Tzvi. He was a gardener in Tirat Tzvi. He didn't have the means to send him any food to Berlin. The Hachshara Center was in Berlin. You can see the date. And he was deported. I've got his details here. I got them from Yad Vashem. He was in Gross Rosen in 1941. Then 2 sub-camps, sent to Dachau, and 1942 sent to Auschwitz, where he died today, the 5th of November, 1942.
Today's the
5th of November. Yeah. And he was 16 when he died, on his own.
Your son is actually today.
Well, I keep the yard side for my family, my paternal family, I keep on in August the 14th. Well, I keep it on the 1st of Elul, because when they were deported to Belgium on the 1st of Elul, and that happened to be on the 14th of August, 1942. And on the 14th of August, 1955, I got married. It was Shabbat Nachamu. I got married on the Sunday. Shabbat Nachamu was the day before. And I wanted to get married on that date. So everything comes round, doesn't it? What goes round comes round.
And these are such beautiful pictures.
So I don't think they're so beautiful. This one, my brother couldn't sit up properly. I don't know how old he was there, but you can see I'm propping him up. And you can see that I've done something. I insisted on something being done with my hair. Now I always wanted plaits, long hair and plaits. And for some reason, my mother, I've got good hair actually, my mother didn't give me plaits. And I made such a fuss when I had this photo taken that the photographer said to my mother, I remember this, for goodness sake, give her the plaits. And she plaited my hair like this, and she said, look Ruth, you've got plaits now, although it's not plaits, you can see. And they made two little, two at the side there. There were plaits, because I so much want, because I said I wouldn't have a photo taken, I remember, unless I had plaits. And my brother looked as if he didn't know what was going on, which he probably didn't know what was going on. Look of total amazement, surprise on his face. And mine was one of success. I got my own way.
And the other pictures also, it's a beautiful picture.
This is, I don't know where we look. It was cold, wherever it was. It says here, we sent it to Liebe Tante Fanny on Lieben Onkel Arthur as a souvenir. Solo and Rutel as a souvenir. January 1939.
So this was in Prague when you were...
Must have been.
And
Must have been in Prague, yeah.
This picture is in 1931 of your parents.
It says on the back, yeah, July 1931, yeah. They got married on December the 25th, 1931, and I've got the ring to prove it. I've got my mother's wedding ring.
That's the original ring?
The original ring. This is my engagement ring, but my wedding, but the original gold ring from 1931, believe it or not, is the best ring that anyone could ever. That's 1931. Yeah, there's a lovely photo of my parents.
It's just amazing.
I've got their.
Here you have.
I've got
the
in there.
original-
I've got what is called. In Germany, you have to have a special book, Familienbuch, in which you've got births, deaths, and all that, which I've got in there somewhere as well.
These are the original, original letters.
All original.
And here are the original postcards.
Yeah.
If you could just explain a few of these, because this is just
I don't
unbelievable.
know. I mean, there's the things that you see. It's got the Hebrew date at the side as well. You can see this. 1940. And who's this? Moishe. This is from Moishe to my parents. But this is Krakow, 1939, from my aunts and so on. I mean, they're all original letters. This one has my grandfather's in Yiddish at the bottom here. This is 30th of July 1939 from Krakow.
It's so precious. So
Yes, it is very precious. You see, my grandfather believed. I think people will understand this here in Israel. He said to Moishe, he sent a letter to Moishe in Yiddish, a beautiful letter in Yiddish, asking Moishe to go to the kever, to go to the grave of a certain Rebbe in Eretz Yisrael and put a kvittel in for him to ask this Rebbe to mediate on my grandfather's behalf. This is from the ghetto, before he was taken to Belgique, and mediate on his behalf. And my grandfather was sure. There's a letter in there from my grandfather in Yiddish. It's like a beautiful letter. He was sure that he would be saved. He was sure he would be saved. Well, it didn't work out, but I mean, my grandfather, that was the sort of man he was an old-fashioned Hasidic Rebbe who believed in that sort of thing.
So here we have also in Yiddish, it's in Hebrew script from 1938.
Oh, this is in Yiddish. Yes. This is the letter in which he asks, Zwickau, yeah. July 38, he asks Moshe to go to this guy. I've had it translated into English because I can't read it very well. I can understand Yiddish if it's in, but not in Hebrew script. It'd take me too long to
This is the original.
This is the original. Look what beautiful writing. Isn't it? Beautiful writing. The writing itself is amazing. Amazing. Amazing.
And with those postcards, you have quite a few also, all the original postcards.
All original postcards. They crammed as much as they could into them. You can see they wrote as small as they could.
And these were, some of them were written in 39.
Yeah. This is Palestina, yeah. This seems to be when he first went there. Moshe first got there. It was in this place. These are all the original postcards. Do you want me to hold them up?
Yeah, please.
This way or the other way?
The front as well. So what happens is many times people tear off the stamps. So it's so wonderful that the stamps are still there with the postmarks.
Didn't have time to tear off any stamps. You want to put it this way or this way?
It's wonderful, and the other way as well. These were sent to Palestine, yeah.
Yeah, my uncle Moshe was already then. Was here. He managed to come in Aliyah, July 1939. He must have just arrived. This is before he went to...
It's also a miracle to have left in 39.
Well, he was with the Hachshara group. He was 19.
So I'm going to just show it a little bit closer.
This is before he went to Tirat Tzvi. He hadn't even got to the kibbutz yet. They sent him, I don't know where they sent him and how they sent him.
And this is also, it's just a magnificent picture. This is before you came to England.
Oh yes, I can't remember. I think it was in Romania, but it says at the back. It says at the back here, Kreisel. But Bukovina, yes, it is.
Bukovina.
Bukovina. That's where my mother, Seret is where Bukovina. I've been back, and I must tell you that the Seret, where I went to the house where she lived.
And it still exists?
Oh yes, the street is still exactly the same. They were digging it up when we were. I went with my daughter. I've got a whole section I wrote about it. I've got all sorts of photographs and so on. When my mother lived there was no toilet, no indoor toilet. There was a place in the garden at the back of the so-called garden, It's when we went, I can't remember the exact date. The date's in there somewhere. There's still no toilet. Still at the back of the garden. People living there, very interesting. But my mother hated, she hated her Romanian, she hated Seret. But she went to a Jewish school. I saw the school. There was only one school, Jewish school. And my mother read and could write Hebrew and spoke very nice Hebrew. The Jewish education in that school at that time was very good, much better than a lot of schools now. But remember that there was no Romania before the First World War.
Yeah.
It was all Austro-Hungarian Empire, and everybody still spoke German everywhere. She was educated in German, not Romanian.
It's just amazing. This is the identity card of Hannah.
Let me just give you this. Well, it's not the identity card, it's after the war. She got a certificate of identity as to who she was and where she'd been, date of leaving former country, the March 1942, which meant that's when she was sent to a concentration camp.
When she was deported.
Oh, this is her identity card in England, but this is when she was deported, and these are the concentration camps that she went to. It's just her identity card. So
Yeah,
she was
certificate of identity.
Displaced person. A displaced person.
And it's amazing.
She was obviously a most amazing person.
It tells all the different camps in Ravensbrück and that she survived.
She ended up in Auschwitz. She went on the death march from Auschwitz.
And to have kept that photo in her...
Well, this is the photo they took after the war.
But in her shoe that she kept...
Oh, this one, yes. Plazow, Ravensbrück, Malhof, Leipzig, Auschwitz. From Auschwitz, she was in Ravensbrück first. Then she left. She went on the death march from Auschwitz, and there was a concentration camp at Leipzig. I didn't even know that, but that's where she ended up. That's where she was liberated from. And then she's got her DP camp number here. 1947 in up Austria. She was in a DP camp till then.
And Ruth, the story about your father being in the hostel in Stamford Hill.
Yes.
And you have the original... That's also amazing that your mother would go with a picture.
Well, everybody did that.
But everybody the first hostel that she went to open the door.
Well, this is it. After I didn't even know it was the first hostel. My daughter told me, because my mother told my daughter. But it was just, these are sort of things that happen out of the blue. I must say, for example, you walk around in Israel and you meet people you haven't seen for 30, 40 years. I mean, I meet people I taught when did I start teaching? I met, a couple of years ago, I met Michaela Grozhinsky, who was one of the... Grozhinskys were very famous bakers.
So the bakery, it's still there.
It's still there. I taught her in 1955 in London, and I saw her again a couple of years ago.
These in Golders Green, they've changed it to Groz. They shortened, but it's still there today. I saw it a few days ago.
I mean, people, I keep meeting people who say, you taught me. I taught the rabbi, who's a rabbi in Leeds now. I've taught hundreds of people, and they remember, they sort of, you suddenly meet them out of the blue after about 50 years or something like that.
And Ruth, I think one of the most amazing things that you have, that you actually bought from
Germany.
From Germany, and
yes, I must tell you about this. This is a book I obviously managed to carry with me everywhere, and it's called Die Waldschule, the school in the woods, and it's a wonderful story about little... It's falling apart.
Well, I'll pick up.
It's a wonderful story about little birds and how they become educated. And I'm going to show you something else. a couple of years ago, one of my daughters became friendly with a young man from Germany, and she said to him, she showed him a photo of this book, because I love this book, and she said to him just by chance, when you go back to Germany, will you see if they're still publishing? She never for 1 minute dreamt, because this was, what, 1938? I don't know.
This is the original?
She never dreamt that they are still publishing the exact same book in Germany now. Oh, you can get the front and the back tells you something of the story in German. Tells you how to have music lessons and geography lessons and lessons what to eat and how to behave and how to be polite to their parents in the trees, and it's the most wonderful, wonderful book. It's a wonderful book.
And Ruth, did you always have a passion to do teaching, to go into the...
No, not really. I can't say I had a passion to do teaching. When I remember at Cowper Street School, my first school, primary school, as soon as I learned to speak it, and I must tell you this story, when I went to the school, the head teacher, who was called Miss, I even remember her name, which is amazing because I don't remember any of the names that I remember yesterday. Her name was Miss Strawbridge, and she helped me. She helped me teach. She taught, she helped me with English, to speak English and to read. And she used to send me with homework every day, few little words to learn and to read. I mean, don't forget I was young. I was 7 years of age. And one day she sent me, and every day I came back and it was perfect. And one day she sent me with a few words to read, and I was very upset. And I said to my parents, "What is this word, to her air?" And they said, "Haven't a clue." In German. I said, "Well, how do they know how to?" I mean, they didn't know how to speak English. I didn't know what to, I was beside myself. And I came back the next morning to school, and I said to her, "I'm very upset." I always got very upset because I didn't learn any. Everything else I know, I can read everything else, but there's one word in what you've given me, the English reading that you've given me, that I can't understand. I can't spell it, I can't pronounce it, and I don't know what it means. And she said, "Which is it?" And I said, "This one, to her air." And that's why I couldn't, who knows which language apart from English has a word like to her air, To her air, what's to her air? That's the story of to her air. So she said, if that's the only word you ever get wrong, you're all right. Never got anything else wrong.
And did you pick up English quite easily?
Very easily, very quickly. I refused to speak, I had to speak German to my parents at the beginning, I suppose. I mean, I had no choice because they did. But my first thing my father bought, and my children laughed because it's so typical of him, he was such a fantastic man. First thing he bought was a dictionary. And he walks around with this dictionary. And in those days, he got a job through Jewish connections with a factory in Dewsbury, which is not far from Leeds, a town not far from Leeds, where he had, it's also a schmutter factory kind of thing, because he used to do this, but he had a very mundane job there. But in those days, during the war, you had to do what was called fire watching, which meant that you had to take a turn to stay in the factory at night in case incendiary bombs fell. So everybody had to do it in turn. So when my father's turn came to do his incendiary work, he used to take his sandwiches, because he always and he used his dictionary, and he learnt English. And that's how he learned. And he spoke and he wrote. His English always had a German accent, but his writing was perfect. His writing was as good as mine, and mine is very good. Maybe I was a bit better, maybe better than that. But he wrote beautiful articles. He made a vow, I don't know if I told you this, he made a vow to God when he arrived in London. told you he was a very religious man, and he made a vow that if God saved his family from the Shoah, from what was going on, he would devote the rest of his life to the Jewish cause. And he did. He came to Leeds. He worked first for Strauss, and once he could speak English, he worked for the JNF, for the Joint Palestine Appeal, then the JIA, then the Zionist Federation schools. He earned frumpence. Frumpence in our vernacular means very little, especially in those days. You know, people did it as sort of an aside. That was his living, and he never had any money. People offered him. Remember, he had a factory originally. He was a very clever man. He could do numbers. He could look at a page with numbers on it, especially money. And as soon as he looked at the page, he knew the total. He was like a computer. He was brilliant with maths, and he was never tempted. And he never accepted anything from all these wealthy men that he was raising money for Palestine, for Israel. So never accepted bribes, not so much bribes, even presents. The only thing he accepted, they begged him and pleaded with him. One factory made him a suit for Pesach, and another one made him something for Rosh Hashanah. And that's all he ever accepted, and that was my father. And in return, they planted for him a forest in Israel.
In honor of your father?
My father. And all the information about this place in Israel, my daughter has in Jaffa, in her flat in Jaffa. She's got all the information about my father. But I've got his...
And what is the name of the forest?
The Biron Forest, Biron Forest, I believe. I mean, it's got all the information here. It's near Jerusalem.
This is amazing. Yeah, Jacob Biron Wood. Wow.
This is my parents at that time, the Biron Wood here.
That is so amazing.
Oh, this is with the president. This is in the school. No, you know, these are run. They're not. No, This is my uncle's Rulik, the one that Hannah's husband. This is my uncle's Rulik. After the war, you know, when he came to England.
Ruth, being in Leeds, a lot of the Israeli prime ministers would come in.
Yeah, well, they had these special fundraising dinners that my father used to organise, you know, to raise money for.
And which prime ministers did you meet?
Well, definitely Ben Gurion, Ben Tzvi, Golda Meir. I presented flowers, you know.
Menachem Begin?
I met Moshe Sharet. No, I didn't meet Menachem Begin. He was my hero at the time. He was my hero, Menachem Begin. I was totally on his side. I can't remember who else. Who's the South African? What's his name?
Abba Eban?
Yeah, Abba Eban. I met him. He wrote. His speaking was like nectar of the gods. Abba Eban was the most wonderful.
His wife was South African.
Abba Eban's speaking was like listening to heaven. He's written some very, very interesting books, you know, history books for children and for adults, the heritage and so on, which I've got all those books in England. But we met some very interesting people.
And you have an amazing picture of Hannah's husband. And he wrote something very special to your father.
Yes, when he arrived. Just let me.
And
he also wrote beautiful poems. She gave, when the reparations came through, she gave a lot of money. He was dead by then, but She gave a lot of money to Gateshead Yeshiva.
Really?
Well, I've got it all in there, and she endowed rooms and things because he was a yeshiva bocher. He was a chazan. I mean, he didn't have time very much in his youth to do anything. You know, he was dead before he did much. And he wrote lovely poems. I've got them all, but the thing is, there's so much stuff here, you know.
And Ruth, can I ask, when your family, were they very well accepted by the British Jews in Leeds?
When you say well accepted, not really. We were poor people. And you know, there's always there's always a gulf between the poor and the rich. The community loved my father because they knew him. He was in charge of all Jewish affairs, sort of thing. And he was a very attractive man. He was a very handsome man as well. My mother used to say, this woman's in love with him and that woman's in love with him. And I used to be very surprised as a child. And I said, well, I don't like that. She said, don't worry, don't worry. He was very handsome. To the day he died, he was handsome. He still had his hair, wonderful hair, and very funny and quiet, modest, never pushes himself. Scrupulously honest. Once he made a promise, there was no budging him. It was very difficult for him to budge for anything. He never allowed me to miss a day of cheder or anything like that. When other children went swimming and had other sports, I never played tennis at school because where did I have to go after school? I'm talking when I was older as well, when I was a lot older. No, Ruth has to go to cheder. She has to go to cheder. It was a good cheder as well. I did my O-levels, I did my A-levels in Hebrew from there. Those are my father's rules. And in those days, you obeyed your father. It never occurred to me. Not like my children used to say, oh, you're the worst parents in the world. Everybody else's parents lets them do this and lets them come in late at night and they allow them to do this, and you are such bad parents. I never said that to my father. I thought my father's law was God. You know, he said to me, you go to cheder. What are you talking about? Swimming? You can go swimming some other time. Well, of course, there wasn't another time except Sundays. When was there swimming? Go Shabbos? Never. And weekdays, I went to cheder during the week. Went to school and straight from school. At the beginning, it was 3 hours of cheder. We did 3 hours of cheder. Never occurred to me that it was hard. I loved it.
And Ruth, at school, it was a non-Jewish school that you went to?
God, yeah, there were no Jewish schools at that time.
Did you have other Jewish children in the
Yes,
class?
there were a lot of Jewish children, but I had a very difficult time at school because it wasn't so much the girls that were anti-Semitic, it was the teachers. And it was a very posh school. I got a scholarship to it. So it was a very, there's still the teachers that were there when it was a very fancy school. And I remember when my dream was to go to Allerton High School. My dream. I said, I used to pray to God, say, I'll never ask you anything again, ever. Just let me pass the scholarship. Let me get a scholarship. And I did. And it was so interesting that I remember the day they got the results in the primary school. I was 11. And the teacher said, Ruth, she said, I'm going to call Ruth Biron out first. I remember, because she's got to go home and tell her mother. And she sent me home to tell my mother. I remember she sent me out of school. She said, run home quickly and tell your mother. And I went to Allerton, and it was very difficult for my parents to buy me the uniform. And I remember, I've just read a book about the same thing. I got the tunic, very long. I was a little skinny child, and everything was too big for me, and I thought it was wonderful. I thought I looked amazing. I looked like a lost. I can't tell you how terrible I must have looked. But when I got there, I remember one teacher in particular. I've never forgotten her. I know her name. I don't even want to mention it. She was the teacher that taught scripture. You know what scripture means?
From the non-Jewish Bible.
Well, she taught, but it was the Old Testament. And she taught something else. I can't remember what else she taught. Maybe French, I don't know. I remember when I first got there, and she called my name. She said, she was Scottish, and she said, "Ruth Biron, come to the front." And I came, and I said to myself, don't cry. Don't dare cry. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I was quite sure that I was not going to. Whatever was going to happen, I was going to stand firm. And she said to the class of girls, 30-odd girls, "Tell them, Ruth Biron, where you were born." This was during the war. I nearly collapsed, and I said, "Germany." Well, can you imagine? Their fathers and their brothers and their grandfathers were all fighting on the front, and I, a German, what do they know about Jews? Nothing. I was standing in front telling them I was born in Germany. So
it's a cruel thing to do.
Of course it's cruel. She was very cruel. And then she said, "Tell them that," she pulled the information out for me. Every time she came to the class, she called me out for something or other. And I'm telling you, I made a vow then. I said, "God, you've got to help me here. I will not cry. I will be like stone. I will be like stone in all her lessons. Just give me strength." And God gave me strength. Never broke down, never cried. She tortured me. It was verbal torture with all sorts of little vibes. Of course I was born in Germany. Tell them that I was a refugee. Tell them that my family were being killed. I didn't know at the time what was happening to my family. Tell them how hard it was for us to live in Hillcrest Avenue, where I lived in the back street somewhere. And tell them how brave your mother. And you know something? I went to Allerton High School. I never allowed my parents to come to parent evenings because they had a German accent. And I didn't want anybody to mock them. I was frightened. Again, not all the teachers were like that, but I was frightened that somebody might mock them, so I didn't allow them to come. But I did allow them to come to what were called speech days, were sort of celebration days when the girls performed, and I was always put on to read a poem or do something because I could remember things, and I let them come to that. I let them come to see me there, and they were quite proud of me.
And how were your classmates when they heard that you were from Germany?
I can't remember. I don't think anybody. There were a couple of them that were not very nice because I was Jewish, not because I was German. Because I was Jewish. And look, these are girls. They were English girls. They'd never seen a foreigner. Don't forget, it's 1940s we're talking about. They'd never seen a foreigner. Never been anywhere. I mean, we're talking about England in the 1940s, not today or even 50 years ago. We're talking about 70 years ago.
Did you make friends with these girls?
No. First of all, I was a Jewish girl, from Jewish girl. That's number one. Had to leave school early on a Friday afternoon, you see, to get home in time for Shabbos. That also, because a lot of the Jewish girls didn't do that. There were Jewish girls there, not so many at the beginning of my career, but later on a lot of Jewish girls went to Allerton High School. They just didn't bother with me. I was poor, and I was foreign. They all took elocution lessons, and I didn't know what elocution was. I had no idea what elocution. I could read perfectly, but a lot of words I actually didn't understand, and I didn't want to ask anybody. I was too proud to ask. And then they all went to ballet lessons. What did I know about ballet? I was dragged through Europe, and then I came and lived in Hillcrest Avenue. Who did ballet in Hillcrest Avenue? Ballet, ballet. And they went horse riding, and the only horses I saw in Serret were dragging carts. I mean, I was a child, there was no television, there was nothing, no communication. I didn't know anything. But I was a reader. I read through the library in Leeds that I went to. I read through that library, read nearly every book in the children's section. Then I went to the adult section. I read everything. All the classics, all the Shakespeare, everything.
And Ruth, in the neighbourhood that you lived in, did you make friends?
Yes, the neighbourhood I lived in,
it was a Jewish area.
It was a Jewish, yes, a poor Jewish area. And we all went to B'nai Akiva together. I had a wonderful childhood. I went to B'nai Akiva, and we were, we were passionate about Israel, because it was made up of I mean, money didn't count. Money, absolutely, I'd never considered myself as poor. I never thought about it. I really never thought about it, that I couldn't do that. Because I went to B'nai Akiva and that was my life. It was my morning, noon, evening life. And my friends in B'nai Akiva, who I've still got to this very day, were my family. And everything I thought of was Eretz Israel and this and that and Hebrew. And I had a wonderful childhood. And I never missed what other people might think is important, you know. Didn't miss nice clothes, didn't care. Most of my friends didn't wear nice clothes, you know, and even if they did, it didn't bother me. Never had anything. And where did I go for holidays? B'nai Akiva camps. That's where I met my husband, actually, at B'nai Akiva camp. And I met him through food. He was at the camp, and apparently he was very tall and always hungry. And somebody told him that Ruth Biron, her mother, is a very good cook, as you obviously know from my history, and she brings with her most wonderful cakes and biscuits that her mother makes. So he came over to B'nai Akiva camp with all those under canvas, came to my tent, and he said, "Are you Ruth Biron?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Have you got anything nice to eat?" I thought it was a cheek, you know. I thought, what is this unknown creature coming asking me for something to eat? I said, "Are you hungry?" He said, "No, I'm not hungry, but I do want something nice." So I said, "Well, I have got nice things. I've got some nice cakes." And that was the beginning of our romance. I was 15 years of age.
So he was, in a way, your first boyfriend?
Well,
boyfriend.
Yeah. I mean, we had boyfriends, but I mean, don't forget, life was not like it is now. Life was not the same.
And Ruth, your brother, did he also,
My brother went to Leeds University, became an agronomist, and as soon as he qualified, he went on Hachshara, B'nai Akiva Hachshara. He also went to B'nai Akiva, and came to Israel when he was just over 21, and lived in Israel. We worked for the I can't remember which company exactly, but he went all over the world as a specialist in different things. He was a specialist on roses, actually, for a long time. And he's now actually very ill in Renana. So, unfortunately, he's very ill. And he married and had 3 sons. He lost 1 son, and I lost 1 daughter. So, we both had our share. I haven't seen him for some months because it's difficult for me to go to, you know, I've been advised not to go in the taxi to Renana, you know, at the moment with this, what's going on, but as soon as things improve, I will go and see him.
And Ruth, if I can ask you, what message do you impart to your children and grandchildren? You've seen so much, and you've lived through such tumultuous times. And
well, the first thing is, the most important thing is to be a proud Jew. Being Jewish is my heritage is very, very important to me. I'm not saying everyone agrees with it, and varying degrees of importance, but mine is that it's all important. That is the most important thing in my life, is being, you know, Judaism, being proud of my heritage. And then to be brave. And one thing about my children, whatever they are, they're all brave. To put up with adversity of different kinds. I mean, you know, you don't have to have great adversity to upset you. To be brave, to be strong, to do what you believe in. And they're all brave and they're all strong. And everybody has adversity of some kind or other. That is the most important thing in life for me.
And coming to live in Israel was a very big part of your life?
Very big. Well, we used to, look, when we were, I married, it's a long story with my husband because it took him a long time to get through. He was in the East End during the war, which meant he got no education. Then he was evacuated, hardly got any education. After the war, he had no education. So his mother sent him he was very good with his hands. Brilliant. He had what everybody called golden hands, whether it was repairing a roof or making the tiniest, you know, gold inlays in furniture, which he learned to do. He was perfect. So she sent him to be a dental technician, and he got his certificates and so on. And when he met me, and later on when we married, my father suggested to him that perhaps he could go a bit further and become a dentist, a dental surgeon. But he didn't have the initial requirements at that time. He had to have different, to get to university, never mind be a dentist. So he was drafted into the army. That in England they still recall that then, and he started learning. He got his. So gradually he got his O-levels, he got his he got his physics and his chemistry and his languages, and we were married, and it was hard. And then he was accepted into university, and it took us all in all, from beginning to end, 9 years before he became a dentist. And that was the best day of my life, and it was on my birthday, 14th of June. The 14th of June, 1963, I got the good news.
It's amazing.
It was on my birthday. It was a Friday, and I remember waiting for the results. And we didn't have we had nothing. We had nothing. No telephone. No heating. No, we had to heat. The way we heated our house was through a fire. And with making a fire so that it would heat the water. So it would heat. We lived. We had a very difficult life, and a few children at the same time, so it wasn't so easy then. But it was the best thing in my life, and we had a wonderful life after that. A wonderful life.
And how many years were you married?
Well, we had 50 years of marriage. He died of pancreatic cancer in 2006.
And you've been in Israel for nearly 10 years.
Well, we had this apartment, the apartment you see here, we bought 30 years ago. We bought it 30 years ago, and we were coming backwards and forwards when we wanted, when we could. And 11 years ago, I decided, after he died, I came backwards and forwards. And then I decided I would stay.
Well, Ruth, we are also grateful that you're here. You're a treasure, you really are. And I just want to thank you so much. For me, it's been personally
I want you to have
such an amazing...
I want you to have a drink.
I will, but Ruth, I just want to thank you really from the bottom of my heart. I am just so overwhelmed with your story. The miracles.
There are plenty of people. Well, there are miracles. There are miracles today.
That your mother baked Shabbos dinner that saved your lives.
Yes.
That dinner actually saved...
This shows how ridiculous the world is.
It's incredible.
It's that people put somebody's life,
for a competition.
For a competition. You see, this is what... It's not my mother that's incredible, though she was an incredible, wonderful, strong woman. It's also the world that is ridiculous. The world is ridiculous. It is. The world is ridiculous. Because you hear of all sorts of things. You hear of incredible... Especially now, brave women who lose their children, brave parents.
You're going through...
Who go through... That's just my phone.
Well, Ruth, thank you so much for the book that you've given, Survivors of the Holocaust, and it's got a chapter on Ruth's story.
Yeah.
But Ruth, your story is really, there are no words. It's spectacular.
No, there are many spectacular stories, and it's so long ago. But having said that, it stays with you. Yeah. It stays with you as if it was yesterday. You may find this hard to believe, but although I don't remember being hungry, I mean, in the shower, because I was in Czechoslovakia, in Prague for 6 months under the Nazis. I don't remember being hungry, but I've got a phobia about food. Wherever I go, I take something with me. I know it sounds totally ridiculous. I mean, in Israel, where every step you've got something to eat, everybody's eating far too much all the time. I put something I take something. In England, in my car, I used to put something. The children used to laugh at me. Said, "Mum, for goodness sake, always took something to eat." And when I peel potatoes, or when I clean a carrot, or when I get vegetables and cook them and so on, prepare them and cook them, I think, I remember the girls in Auschwitz, how they used to lie on the ground and lick the dust if somebody spilt a drop of soup. I mean, these books behind me, I've been lectured on the Holocaust for, well, since the end of the war, let's put it this way, which is a long time ago. And this is my collection of Holocaust literature. I remember everything. I remember everything, whereas I forget a lot of other things. But I remember everything, and I feel it's with me all the time. It's with me.
Well, I think whoever watches this video, their lives, they'll be so touched, and it will...
Well, it's a matter of, you know, people say never again, and look what's happening now, and never again. Of course again, think the only great difference is that here we've got a chance to stand up for ourselves. And if we die, as some have to, we make a sacrifice, it's for our country. It's not because we were dragged into places, you know, like lambs to the slaughter. They didn't go like lambs to the slaughter anyway. And people say that it's not true.
You know, you say something so profound that people said, why don't you just leave? But there was no place to go to.
Well, my family, and the ones in Poland, you know, my father's family wanted to leave, but
nobody wanted to accept.
They were poor people. They were poor. He was a Rebbe, Hasidic Rebbe. Didn't speak this. He didn't speak that. Didn't know. And came from Dukla, you know, dormitory town of Krakow. It's a shtetl. I looked it up yesterday. What it was called? It's called a shtetl. Dukla's a shtetl. He was born in Jaslo, which is also a shtetl, and he had no education. He was a Rebbe, you know, a Hasidic rabbi, and. What do they need? A Hasidic rabbi with 6 children. He had 6 children, you know. I mean, my father had 5 other siblings. And my mother's family, they were not sophisticated. They lived in this dump in Seret. It's very difficult to talk about these things. You know, Jews were not free in Europe. No Jews were free in Europe. If you had money, then all doors are open to you if you've got enough money. Or if you've got enough sponsors, if you've got people who are willing to vouch for you, then you've got a chance of being able to get somewhere. My Auntie Faye, you know, Auntie Fanny, the one that I've got these photographs of as well, she came to England just before we did because her husband's brother was a shirt manufacturer and he had a business in London. They lived in Dresden, Chemnitz, which is very near Zwickau. And his brother Max Nachman had a firm I forgot what the firm is called, a firm of shirt makers, and he was accepted as a sponsor. You couldn't say you were a sponsor if you lived in a backyard somewhere. You had to have money, you had to have status and standing. It's not a matter of just people saying, I will be a sponsor to these people, because the British government wanted you to guarantee for life kind of thing.
They didn't want it to be a burden. They didn't want a burden on the state.
They didn't need it. I mean, the country was badly off enough. You know, America as well. They were all from the recessions and from this and that, and Canada. Nobody wanted refugees with nothing. They weren't prepared to accept, and they didn't care. It wasn't just that they were anti-Semitic. I think if anybody would have wanted to come, they didn't want them. They didn't want an extra burden on their economy, where these people came with nothing. They didn't think that they came with brains. I mean, this is what the Jews brought with them, brains.
So
brilliant people who made a difference to their schools and their universities and their, you know, I mean, it's incredible that, as I say, if my father had been famous or if he had money, they would have let him come in. But nobody's going to sponsor a family of 6 with 6 children.
Well, thank God you managed to escape and you survived.
We were very, very lucky. We were lucky in every way you can imagine. We were lucky, but my parents were also very resourceful and very brave. When you think of my mother with 2 children in that sort of, you know, place, and the fact that she refused. She also refused, I didn't even mention it. There were church groups in Prague. They weren't missionaries. I've just forgotten the name. Martha, who offered to save Jews. They were sent by their church group in America to save Jewish children. And they offered to take me. And I've got my name, I've got amongst this, I've got my name on a list. Ruth Biron and her brother, you know, offered to take me to America. And my mother was still, she was ambivalent, you know, to be separated from us. And I didn't go with them, and I didn't go on the kinder transport for reasons I told you. My brother was too young. And my mother kept us together. And she was brave doing that. It's because you see what happened, they said, put the children in an orphanage, go and you can get work in England. She could have got work as a domestic, any time she could have got work. And leave the children behind. When you're there, bring them over. Now what happened to most of them, if you read through this literature, the first thing Hitler did when he went anywhere was to clear the orphanages. Yeah. Clear the orphanage. You didn't need Dr. Korczak, you know, to his book. They cleared the orphanage because they were in the way. You know, they were just a nuisance. First thing, all the children would... So if my mother had put us in an orphanage, one thing's for sure, we wouldn't be here today. So she would not be separated, and that took a lot of courage, because I'm sure people said, well, how can you take the risk of staying with your children when you could be saved and you could help them when you go to England or to France or wherever they have the domestics, you know. You could get a job as a domestic any time.
Well, she made the right decision, thank God.
Look, a lot of people were reunited. I've got friends in Netanya, I don't know, not in Netanya, but in Israel, someone I know, who it's just their parents went to England and they brought him over. And he was lucky, he managed to get out. As a child, as a small child, younger than me. But you weren't all, there's no guarantee.
Well, Ruth, I'm speechless, but I'm so grateful to you, Ruth. Ruth, you should just have Mazel and Bracha at Mavis room till 120 in only good health.
I don't know about Mavis room, but
Ruth, you're an inspiration. You really are inspiration to all of us. We can all strive to emulate. Really, you are phenomenal. You're amazing.
You've got to be strong, and you've got to take what you're given and try and make the best of it.
I think your message is so profound and so amazing.
And we will succeed. We will. No question about it. I'm Yisrael Chai. I don't for 1 minute believe in anything but that. Absolutely.
No, absolutely.
The only thing is, of course, that we pay a price.
It's a terrible sacrifice.
We have to pay a price. And unfortunately, that is our destiny, that we have to pay for whatever we get.
Well, Ruth, thank you so much. And just now, how grateful I am.
I just have to hope that God's listening to us.
Please, God.
Let's hope He's listening. That He's not too busy with the American election.
Well, Ruth, really, I'm so extremely grateful to you.
No, don't say that.
No, really, you really are.
No, I don't want to be an inspiration.
There are no words,
just
really.
Want to be.
Thank you so much, Ruth.
You're welcome.